So I have absolute great pleasure in welcoming our next speaker. Heard Helaine speak before, and it's been absolutely incredible. I was captivated from the word go. No pressure, Helaine. The stage is set. Helaine will be chatting to us about exploring the privacy and law as a complex wicked problem. Helaine Leggat is the managing partner of ICT Legal Consulting. She's a solicitor in her own right and a non-executive director and a security certifications holder. Helaine also has a vast amount of expertise in national legal systems applied to cyberspace, privacy data protection, and cyber warfare. It gives me great pleasure to ask Helaine to address us.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Good to be here. I've enjoyed every minute. I compliment the organisers on a really great day so far. Thank you. And also my conversations with each of you individually have been interesting and enjoyable. Now, I have a big topic. I'm going to share with you some story, and I'm almost afraid of using any words because we've had words in ontology and meaning and so on from the word go this morning. But I'm going to give you a little slice of my world. And largely what I want to do is tell you how it's all connected and how everything I've heard here is all connected. And how mostly that we are our PI. And what are we going to do about that? Because that, who we are, feeds into everything else we've heard here and into the future. Now, I want to start by saying I do not believe in the scary kind of AI monster, but I'll get to that just now. I'm far more of a pragmatist. So to begin with, I should say, or I'd like to start anyway by saying, why am I here? I don't have one PhD, let alone 3. I'll start here. I grew up so long ago that we had convicts come to my garden when I was a little girl. They were chained and they worked under armed guard. I grew up in apartheid South Africa in what was really a Truman world of propaganda. We thought the things were perfect, but actually all of my life was shaped by conflict. Initially it was black-white, and then it was black-black. After that, it became cyber conflict. But it's been the current that has directed my profession because I believe in humanity. I'm better at the big picture things than the more difficult individual relationships. But I care deeply about humanity, about people, about the balance of power. And I care deeply about this country that I've come to love, and everything I do now is directed to protect it and the way of life that we have that is extraordinary. Essentially, I came here not as a lawyer, because Australia doesn't need South African lawyers, but because my family had fled. We had dreadful things happen, and I was left behind in a world that I couldn't escape. And luckily, I managed to, my firm was identified by an Australian organisation, and they brought me over. I came here as a security professional on a 457 visa in 2012. I started a law firm in 2013. I took it international in 2020. This is the law firm now. I'm a teacher, a lawyer, a security professional. I'm a fellow of international privacy. I teach at Marsh University on data privacy and security. So I'm a strange animal. Lawyers don't know what to do with me. Security people don't know what to do with me. It's helpful, actually, because you can angle what you're doing. But this is the firm I am today, and I'm going to share with you some mosaics of my life, which I hope will give you inspiration of what we can do. It starts by, well, this is a reminder, but what is happening? What is going on? This is a marvelous, on the left there, a podcast that I recommend you listen to. You'll hear me speak about some of these things because they're so good. But Chris Hayes of MSNBC speaks with Kate Crawford, who has been specializing in AI for many, many years, most of her life. And they raise certain issues that I think are meaningful and will direct our thinking. And I'm going to take out snippets of this and make connections as I go through. And I only got 20 odd minutes, so it's going to be quick. One of the things that comes up is this history of AI. And we go right back to the 60s when we had Joseph Weissenbaum, who started the ELIZA project. And really what he wanted to do was just see if he could, use scripts to let people think that they were talking to another human being with a computer. And in my law firm in South Africa 20 years ago, we had that little pretty pictures girls chewing pencils while they answered legal questions. And that was way back 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. What they didn't get right in all those next 20 years was they didn't realize the power and the value of vast amounts of data. The guy on the left, Robert Mercer, who was the great Republican funding, like Steve Bannon and so on, tried to do it when he was at IBM, but they never had enough data to actually teach machines what to do to provide credible results. IBM was, in the 80s, involved in a long antitrust case that lasted for 13 years. During that time, the millions of pages that were collated in the litigation became the data that was used to develop the big data programs. What they learned then was you don't need to teach computers about language or this or that. You're just giving them so much information that they have samples. So if you say things like, thanks, the computer's going to guess so much. It's exactly what we see on our computers, what we've seen for a long time, but clever, sensible stuff. The scary part comes when we now say what we're going to do with all of this, because there's more and more being pumped in. But let's look at the next step. Now, in that podcast, they talk about inflection points where something happens in life where we are so directed and we need to choose again what's going to happen. This is just one example. 1400s, Alberti said, how do we want to picture ourselves in the world? How do we see ourselves in the world? And I think that's part of what we need to do today. Who are we in this world? And he really perfected linear perspective. That smaller size shows you further away. But these are mechanisms to show us who we are and how we fit into where we are. Another snippet. On the left, and remember, in my world, we talk about rights. We're going to get to rights of privacy and things just now. But briefly, law is about the rules that govern a certain people in a certain place at a certain time, sometimes in a specific subject matter. That's the simplest, that's what we're dealing with. There was a time when humans had no rights, animals had no rights, women had no rights, children had no rights. Currently, things have no rights. I think that they might well be accorded rights of some sort in the future. But legally, at the moment, automated profiling without some human intervention is excluded, certainly in GDPR. But watch the space, as it were. The thing with this AI movement, because of the greed at which information is collected and scraped, and you'll see just now what Australia is already beginning to do about it, because it can be so frightening, is all of this collation of data is mixed in and can be used in a way that whoever is collecting it wants to use it. In the Industrial Revolution days, it took months and months and years to design machines, build machines, teach people how to train them, roll them out across the colonies, etc., before there was any improvement. With AI, it's as simple as building an API. And they reckon as possibly soon as 18 months, we're going to see some differences that we can't imagine now. So privacy, this enormous gathering of information and the way that it is mined will determine our future. And certainly there is no other area in any other field of law, and I must admit I've only really specialized firstly in property until cyber came along, but in cyber law, privacy and security. But there isn't any other field where lawyers can't just be privacy lawyers. They actually need to understand technology and they need to know how to implement these things into environments, both public and private sector. I think because I'm this strange mixed animal and because of my own particular history, moving not only from the convicts long ago, but first qualifying in art, then getting married, having babies, and I was a dairy farmer for years before. I thought, there must be more to life than this. I've got to be a lawyer. Anyway, in 2013, I was asked to write an article because privacy was not here, right? We've got a 1988 Privacy Act. No one cares about it. I think it was the third oldest one, is the third oldest one in the world. And at the time, the IAPP, International Association of Private Professionals, didn't even have a chapter here. And they asked me to write an article to try and encourage people into the profession, which I did. And I said, for me, privacy is the most important kind of information that there is, because it is the very access point to good and evil. Now, I knew that then. When Cambridge Analytica happened, I said, I told you long ago, because PI is as important as national security. And that's exactly what they did. That's where we saw the first political interference, election interference. A point to all of you, and I think that you're all good guys, is, again, I have an ambivalent relationship with the law, a profession that I worked so hard to enter into, because I don't like fighting about widgets, somebody has to. But I prefer the high ideals of jurisprudence. What is this about and how should societies work? And we have to hold on to some of that as we go forward and grow out of adolescence into adulthood and try and make a better world. So for me, this Cambridge Analytica thing was really important. And it was interesting that it was Alex Stamos, who was the CISO, anyway, he was on the security side of Facebook at the time. And it was he who said what we are doing is not correct. It was Zuckerberg and Sandberg who said, let's go for the money. And I always say to my security friends, you are more important than lawyers. It is you who become the guardians of our society. The lawyers might subsequently manage, but the guardians of the security people who understand humanity, and as I said, our PI is who we are now. So this, incidentally, is a very new one, voice deepfakes. You know, ATO and the banks are now saying, take a recording, my voice will identify me. Already they're cloning that with AI and getting money out. So fast, so quick, that even the level of support that Australia is undertaking at the moment in terms of trying to prevent scams and so on is not enough. This is such a wonderful place and people are so innocent. I'm going to move to law quickly. About halfway through. This is just a piece from our 1988 Privacy Act. As I said, it's a really old one. It says there that this is all about human rights. It links to Human Rights Council, Human Rights Act, and so on. There's no doubt about it. That is what it's supposed to be. Now, it's always a bit of a pest to look at this thing and we talk about privacy. What we're talking about in my world is less about privacy, or that's turning a circle and getting back there. But initially, it was less about privacy in the sense of the right to be left alone, but more in the sense of the personal information, you identifying information, which really is what the cyber thing is about. But already now that is becoming privacy in the old sense of the word, which is its right to be left alone, right to seclusion, right to who are we going to share what information with? Do we have the right, as they do in EU, to actually be forgotten and have things deleted? But it also means that everything that is digital needs to be secured. So when I work with clients, I always start with what is your regulatory universe? What are the laws that you must subscribe to, comply with? And it's federal, it's state, and it's industry specific here. You can't do anything without then saying, if it is electronic, it has to be secure. Because if we go to RCI, triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, confidentiality is really just a version of privacy. Integrity is not an equality, but can it be trusted? And again, you go to AI and what's happening online, and the interpretation that people are giving this information, depending on what they want to present, it is highly risky. So we're not just talking about a government service that says, if you want this record and it was produced in that date, is it integrous? Can you trust it? Or similarly with an online shopping and the price of the goods, you're dealing with, is this real? Can it be trusted? Are we people who can rely on the world that we live in? And this is all seeded, this legal security stuff is seeded into a world where we already have so much mis and disinformation and so much bad intent. Again, just be aware of it. do what you can, because certainly these are all manner of wicked problems we're looking at. So CIA, I'm going to go very quickly because this particular statute is fabulous for people. So in the late 90s, the world got together under UNCITRAL, and they created this model law on electronic commerce that facilitated electronic commerce and also communications. And not only did they want the CIA, they also wanted this, that if we were going to rely on it, that information had to be integrous and it had to be available and accessible for future reference. So you've got the eye for integrity of the CIA, and you've got the accessibility, which is, if it's not there, you can't use it. It's no good. So you can't do anything in this world unless you can trust it. But remember, this information I'm talking about now is actually today's focus in this talk is who we are. It's who we are. I want to look at property rights in this regard too. Sometimes you need to look at very precise legal definitions. Sometimes you need to do something else. I believe in both. In this case, property, and this comes out of various Australian cases, is not actually something in itself. It is about a legal relationship that we have with the thing. Now, I say to you, we have a legal relationship with our information that is out there. Somebody is taking our property. They're unlawfully acquiring, accessing, using, and making themselves immensely rich with it. Now, we have already lost in this deal, this commercial bargain, becoming a political and power bargain as well, the consent argument. We are still fighting to get credit for who we are and the fact that people are using ourselves, our stuff, our thinking, our intellectual property. And we can still argue for compensation. But this is a conversation for now, and it is enormously complex. We are beginning to see some movement in the right direction. The first EU Act, it's not yet an act, it's actually just passed through one of the houses. It's got to go through one of three bodies to be accepted. But the Europeans who gave us the really detailed hard work of GDPR are working on this. So I think they expect this to be law by the end of the year. And there are, well, there is people in this room, all of you. It's determined by a number of standards. So if there's unacceptable risk, the use is banned altogether. If it's high risk, there's strict obligations. If there's limited risk, there's a high degree of transparency that's needed. If it's minimal risk, you can use it freely. Actually, in many respects, Australia is ahead. It was the first country in the world where legal service delivery was sent to a Facebook page. Did you know that? It was also the first place in the world where, in partnerships, unmarried partnerships, the partner was accorded the same rights that they would have had they married. So Australia is really advanced in some ways, and others very far behind, largely for the best reasons, because it's such a good, safe place to be. But that, I think, is going to be really good. But some years ago, when I was on the board of the Australian Information Security Association, we were actually involved with government. I'm probably going back 7 years, at least 7 years, to work out principles for the safe use of AI. I haven't heard that anything's come of that, which is disappointing, but maybe it'll be picked up now. This is the other one. This is even newer. This is just last month, I think. The new print for an AI Bill of Rights. And you would have seen that there were 7 AI companies that all come together under pressure. Not only were certain people, OpenAI, I think, started the conversation to say we ourselves are worried about these. These are our vulnerabilities. This is what's happening, because the world is worried. So good to see this. Anybody out there? I mean, if we're looking at who we are, which is out there, which has been mind manipulated and used for goodness knows what. We need to begin to say, what is it about? Now, if I go back to the law, you'll be amazed because people generally think there's one law that governs this thing, and it's a major mistake. There's one new law and they look at that. And that's really quite unhelpful. There is a vast body, you've got to look across everything to see how things are connected. It's difficult and hard work to do, but if you do, you can rationalize it and come up with something that's actually really sensible and easy to implement, even in big environments. The problem is, outside of taking control of who we want to be, like our Bertie, and managing who we are in this world and how we want to be represented, what if we have positions that are baked into this AI that produce, for example, polarizations that are so adversarial? How do we know not only what is true and not true? How do we know what is going to happen in terms of, if not intellectual interference, the persuasions that can happen? And I think the answer to that has to come from us being involved and deciding how we want to be in this world. Again, even this company, which is not my favorite, is doing some good things. But for me, and this is not a conclusion with one full stop because there isn't one, it's just, where do we go now? I'd like to think that we need a new kind of global coming together, like the model laws and conventions that we saw in the late 90s, where the world came together and said, this tech stuff is happening. What are we going to do with it? Let's recognize it, let's restrict it, measure it, keep people safe. We saw those in the 90s. In 2001, we saw the Budapest Convention, which was the first international convention on cybercrime. Really good stuff. One of the ways that law is adopted into national legal systems is through these model laws and conventions. So all of, for example, our Criminal Code Act of 95, that all comes straight from the Budapest Convention. It means that 67 countries around the world all agree what's right and what's wrong behavior on computers. We need to expand on that. We need to expand on the marvelous overarching interpretive ability of electronic law. So we're not saying, I should ask a question. Give me 1 second. Who wants to tell me what they think data is? We talk about it all the time, right?
Digital information.
Pardon?
Digital information.
Yes, more. It is that, but more.
Quantified attributes.
Yes. So mostly out of these information laws I'm talking about, we spoke about information. When we Australia adopted those provisions of that convention into our national legal system through Electronic Transactions Act, here in the federal one was 99, we said information is the definition. Information means words, pictures, video, blah, 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 and data. And then, comma, and data is defined in the Copyright Act. Bring this all together. People are collecting our stuff. We're not using intellectual property law. If we sit down and find clever solutions, we don't need to write more laws. So there's your problem to go away and think about.
Before I let you go, just a thought from my side, that point that you raised about the interpretation of data is so important, because data is the perception of the perceiver, and the perceiver is reality to the perceiver. So it's very important when data gets out there. But we've got a few questions which I'd like to ask you. How do socio-cultural differences in perceptions of privacy further complicate global harmonization of privacy laws?
That person knows what they're talking about.
I wish I could give them credit, but I can't.
Privacy, well, whoever you are, privacy is a reflection of culture, history, religion, and all sorts of things. That's what it is. So it shapes it massively depending on where you're sitting.
And interpretation. What are your thoughts on self-regulation in the tech industry?
In some
Let's have a
respect,
cup of coffee with Anonymous.
in some respect, I'm quite fond of it. I actually gave a talk in Canberra once on DTL, distributed ledger technologies for law. And there's a lot of really good academic info on that around the world, largely out of America. But read about it. The problem is, the answer to that is that the code writers become the lawyers. And that's a bad solution. So I think that's why it's never happened. But there's merit in it. I have worked, and in fact, I'm on the board of the Critical Infrastructure Information Theory and Analysis Centre, CISAC, for Australia, which we started and launched officially early this year, soft launch in Feb, and then formal launch on the at the Sunshine Coast in March, because that's where the biggest cable comes into Australia that links us to all of Europe. And what was I going to say? Oh, it's about sharing data. Oh, missed my point there, but anyway, there was some connection.
Good play for the Thank you.
I'm singing for my supper. Thank you.